Hello, my name is J.R. Richardson. I am here at Bellevue University's Military Veteran Services Center. Today is the 27th of March, 2023, and I am here with the Nebraska Vietnam Veterans Memorial Foundation's Share Your Story project. I am joined here today with Robert Servant, Colonel, United States Air Force retired, and Robert has agreed to share his story with our audience. Robert, can we start with just you giving your name, date of birth, where you were born, and how things started for you when you were younger?
Okay, name is Robert, go by Bob, Servant. Date of birth is 31 October 1949. What was the last thing you wanted?
Just a little bit about your growing up.
Oh, well, let's see. I've got, grew up in Fall River, Massachusetts, and have two brothers and two sisters. I'm the second oldest in the family. My father was a World War II Army service member, and also Korean War, and a career Army NCO, retiring at the rank of E8 in the Army. So did not have a very good childhood. Ended up growing up on, my mom and dad got divorced, and we ended up living off of welfare, and didn't see a lot of future for myself. After going to high school, well, before I went to high school, started working, trying to make some money, supplement the welfare. Ended up working for the, I forget the name of the program, but I was working for the city waterworks department, and through high school. Never had a car. Ended up getting ready to graduate high school. Didn't see a real future for college because I had no money, and was just ready to be drafted at that point into the Army. So my high school year, senior year, was 1967 when I graduated, and just so happened the social worker that was running the program at the time asked me if I wanted to go to college, and I said, well, I don't know that I can go to college, I don't have any money. And he basically asked, if I get you a grant, would you go to college? I said, sure. So he was able to get me a grant at a junior college. I wish I'd have studied harder before then, but I did get to go to junior college, and got an associate degree in electromechanical engineering. And I knew when I graduated, or as I was getting ready to graduate in 1969, I knew I was going to be drafted, because my draft number, if I remember right, was like 31. So I knew I was going to be drafted, so I started seeking out recruiters. Went to the Army recruiter, and they said they would make me a warrant officer, and I would be flying helicopters in 1969. And I looked at the survival rate for helicopter pilots in 1969 in Vietnam, and it was very low. So I said, well, maybe there's other options. So I went to the Air Force recruiter's office, and they said, yeah, we'll let you join. So I enlisted in the, graduated junior college in the summer of '69, and went in the Air Force in December of 1969. My first day was the 17th of December, and went through there. And at that time at Lackland Air Force Base, where basic training was, all the training instructors, drill instructors, they all knew that if you got kicked out of the Air Force training, you were going directly to the Army. So they always hung that over your head and made sure you were motivated to graduate basic training. So I graduated basic training, and my first tech school was at Shepherd Air Force Base in Wichita Falls, Texas, which is for Ballistic Missile Systems Analyst Technician. Acronym was BMAT, and that was for a launch crew member on a Titan II missile system, intercontinental ballistic missile, and that was at Shepherd. It was a long school, almost a year. In the middle of school, we were able to get a break, so I was planning on marrying my wife, who I had met when we were both 16, and from the same town of Fall River. And so I took my break, went home on leave, got married. Of course, I had to get permission from my squadron commander at Lackland, and I also had to get permission from my mother because I wasn't 21, and in the state of Massachusetts you have to be 21. A male had to be 21 to get married without permission from their parents. So I got my permissions, I got married, took my lovely bride to Wichita Falls, where we had our first apartment, and I think the rent was $60 a month, all bills paid. And at this time I still didn't have a car, so relying on my classmates at Shepherd to bring me to class and take me home, and it was all very interesting times. From Shepherd, my first permanent duty station was McConnell Air Force Base in Wichita, Kansas, where I had to go through further training, which involved a trip to Vandenberg Air Force Base in California for operational readiness training. And after completing that, back to McConnell for upgrade training to upgrade me to a certified launch crew member. And went from there, after being on a line crew, which is basically a basic crew of 4 people, 2 officers and 2 enlisted, a crew commander, a deputy crew commander, the missile systems analyst technician, and a missile facilities technician, responsible for keeping a Titan II missile on alert, ready to go, and respond to orders from the President of the United States. So basically, one of the backbones of our nuclear deterrent mission that's been around for decades now. Titan II missile system went on alert in 1962, and there were 18 missiles at each base, and there were 3 bases. So McConnell Air Force Base, Davis-Monthan Air Force Base in Arizona, and Little Rock Air Force Base in Arkansas. So after spending time in the 532nd Strategic Missile Squadron and the 533rd Strategic Missile Squadron and the 381st Strategic Missile Wing, as a line crew member, then instructor crew member, then a evaluator crew member, pulling numerous alerts underground. Alerts involved going to a pre-departure briefing at 7 in the morning, driving out to the missile site, spending 24 hours out there, being relieved by the next crew, driving back from the site, getting that day off, and then the next day, and then going back on alert. That was my life besides a part-time job. of moving furniture. I say part-time, but it was like 40 or 50 hours a week. Still didn't have a car. I didn't get a car till probably late 1970, and that was good because my wife got pregnant right after we got to McConnell, and the pay at that time was not very much. I'm trying to remember. I think married and being an airman first class, I was making $120 a month. So that's why I had to have a part-time job. And performing alerts and moving furniture. And my wife didn't drive for quite some time. So it was when I wasn't on alert or moving furniture, I was doing laundry or shopping. So I'm surprised I survived those days. Anyway, after being on crew for several years and pulling about 430 alerts, I got an office job as the NCOIC non-commissioned officer in charge of training for the wing. And then finished up my college at night, in addition to all that, to get a bachelor's degree. And I was able to do that and got a bachelor's degree from Kansas Newman College in Wichita. As soon as I got my degree, I applied for officer training school to become a commissioned officer in the Air Force. And I put down on my application that I was a volunteer for missile duty, because I knew I had a better shot of getting a commission if I volunteered for missiles, because the Air Force had a hard time recruiting missile officers. And was accepted to OTS and went to school at Medina, which was an annex off of Lackland Air Force Base in Texas, San Antonio, Texas. Graduated OTS, getting a commission on the 1st of July of 1980. And I was a distinguished graduate. Left there, and my first assignment as an officer was to Little Rock Air Force Base in Little Rock, Arkansas, to be a launch officer on a Type 2 missile crew. And I succeeded there quite well. I became one of the first second lieutenant crew commanders and the first second lieutenant instructor crew commander while I was there. It was kind of funny when I'd sit in the pre-departure room and the security forces would come around and give us our codes to enter the site. They always looked at my deputy crew commander, who was a first lieutenant, and I was a second lieutenant, and they would always try to give it to her. And I said, no, I'm the commander, give it to me. So, and it was kind of unique because she was one of the first female Air Force Academy grads, and she ended up on a missile crew, which was kind of strange, I thought. But anyway, I had a lot of good crew members, both as when I was enlisted and as an officer. I excelled at Little Rock Air Force Base as an instructor commander, in standardization evaluation commander, wing commander kept trying to get me to try out for Olympic Arena, which is the missile competition that's held every year. And that's when I was a deputy crew commander, and I told him, I said, I'd be glad to try out, just make me a crew commander. He just laughed. But anyway, I didn't try out for Olympic Arena, and I got involved in Olympic Arena though as the instructor, training crew commander, to train the crews to go out and compete at the missile comp. That was in 1983, and the year after that I tried out to be a competitor, and I succeeded, and I was the crew commander of one of the 2 crews that went out to compete. And that year we won Best Titan Operations Crew. Did not win the overall missile comp for the wing, but we did fairly well. And the year after that I competed again as a crew commander. And that year the wing, which had never won the Blanchard Trophy in the history of the wing, won the Blanchard Trophy, and also won more trophies in the history of the comp by all the teams. And we brought the Blanchard Trophy back to the wing for the first time ever. And this was just before Titan II was to be deactivated. And the wing was deactivated in 1987. So from 62 to 87, Titan II was an operational weapon system. Being a liquid propellant system, it was pretty dangerous to be on a Titan II crew, or to do maintenance in the missile silo and the launch duct, because it was a liquid propellant system. It had a few accidents over the 25 years of being on alert. There was a couple of leaks of propellant at McConnell over the years, and then there was an accident at Little Rock in 1980 that resulted in the missile actually blowing up. And the final decision, or last straw if you will, for the Air Force to decide to deactivate the system. So in 1980, when I first got to Little Rock, the accident that caused the missile to blow up happened on the 19th of September of 1980, and I showed up on the 29th of September 1980. So you can imagine there was a lot of changes in the wing leadership, and the wing was in turmoil, but went on to be one of the best Titan wings after that, and all due to the leadership that was brought in and the crew members and maintainers and security forces. So overall, Titan was my entire career from let's say 1970 until 1986 when I left Little Rock. But after missile comp, I had pulled my last alert in April of 1985, and I ended up with 630 alerts in Titan, and then they wanted me to be a sector commander as a captain, which is normally a major's position. So I ended up being a sector commander in the 533rd, no, not 533rd, that's McConnell, the 374th Strategic Missile Squadron. So the 308th Strategic Missile Wing at Little Rock had 2 operation squadrons, the 373rd and the 374th, and I ended up being the sector commander responsible for 3 Titan II sites and all the crews that operated on them. And then we get a new wing commander, and lo and behold, I was on leave, and the deputy commander for operations called me up and said, "Hey, you need to come and see the wing commander." I said, "Why?" I said, "I'm on leave." He said he's interviewing people to be his exec. I said, "Well, I don't want to be the exec." He said, "You don't have much choice. Get in here, you got an appointment." I said, "Okay, I'll have to get a haircut first." So I went and got a haircut, went on my interview, and the wing commander was Colonel Richard Green with an E at the end, and he interviewed me, and I told him, I said, "Well, you know, I really don't know anything about being the exec. And he basically told me, he said, well, I don't know anything about being a wing commander, which I know was not true. And he said, we'll learn together. I said, okay. So I became his exec, and it was probably a good decision on my part, because he was very influential in getting me the necessary endorsements to get a promotion to major 3 years before the primary zone. So that was good. That was good of him to do that. Anyway, I ended up with an assignment from Little Rock Air Force Base in 1986 to SAC headquarters at Offutt Air Force Base as a captain, and ended up working in the operations directorate in the missile operations division for 3 years, and I was the chief of ICBM operations for Peacekeeper, Minuteman 3, and Titan 2, because it hadn't deactivated yet till '87, and wrote all the procedures for operations regulations for SAC, and for the Inspector General to inspect all the units, the missile units. And then got promoted early, and pinned on major in December 1988. And I was coming up on my 3 years at SAC, and that's normally when you rotated. And assignment personnel called me up and said, you got a choice, since you're now a major and you've never been overseas, you need an overseas tour. He said, you've got a couple of choices. And by this time I already had like 19 years in the service, 19 and a half. And he said you could go to Sicily at Comasau Air Base in ground launch cruise missile for 2 years, bringing your family with you. Or you could go 1 year, leaving your family at Offutt, or you can get out. Those were my choices. And at that time I had a son in high school, a daughter was just getting ready to start college, and I said, well, I'm not going to rip my family up for 2 years, and I'm not going to get out. So I decided to go to the ground launch cruise missile system in Sicily at Comasau Air Base, which took me to Arizona for training, which was kind of interesting. Ground launch cruise missile was really what should have been an Army mission, like Pershing missile was, except the Army wanted like 300 people to operate a flight, and the Air Force said we could do it with 72. So the Air Force got the mission, and ended up with 72 people on a flight for each ground launch cruise missile flight, and that was an interesting assignment. Never having been overseas, it's kind of like a culture shock. Made me appreciate the United States a lot. And for those that don't know it, the Italians, or Italy, mainland, really don't look at Sicily as part of Italy. And yes, there are mafia families on Sicily. And it also has an active volcano, Mount Etna. Anyway, that was an interesting tour, and it always reminds me of how dangerous some of the Air Force jobs are. We had one security force guy on a flight that was driving a Humvee, and he ended up going up too steep of a hill and had to back up, and as he backed up, the Humvee rolled, and it rolled over his passenger and killed him. And the passenger was just a young airman who had just gotten married, and his wife just had a baby. And it's kind of sad when you think about that. In 2020 hindsight, you say, well, that could have easily been prevented, but 20-year-olds are 20-year-olds. That was a different assignment. I went out there with the flight, and they dig foxholes and everything else, just like the Army would. And they provided their own security for the flight and the missile system and everything else. But that too was deactivated. Seems like there's a trend here of my units and that I go to got deactivated. So the IRBM treaty that was signed when President Reagan was the president with Russia to eliminate intermediate range ballistic missiles, or the IRBM treaty, that deactivated the Glickam and Pershing systems as a peace treaty, and the Russians or Soviet Union did away with theirs at the same time. Then following that assignment, I kept calling the personnel folks saying, hey, where am I going to go after my 1-year remote to Italy? And they said, well, you're an early promote to major. You're going to go to, the Air Command and Staff College in Alabama. For sure, you're going to go to school. Well, having worked with personnel before, assignment personnel, I said, well, I don't see that until I see the writing. I don't believe that. So on my mid-year leave, I came home to Omaha, Offutt, and started trying to find a job at Offutt. So I was able to do that and get a job at the Joint Strategic Target Planning Staff, JSTPS, which was responsible for targeting and building the nuclear war plan, also known as the Strategic Integrated Operational Plan, which was at Offutt, and the director was dual-hatted as the commander of SAC, and it was a joint assignment. So I got to come back to Offutt because I didn't get to go to school, and stayed at JSTPS for 3 years. It was a 3-year tour, control tour, a joint tour. So then it was time to move on, and working with assignment personnel again, they had no idea where they were going to send me. So I started looking for jobs in the joint world and got a job at United States Pacific Command in Hawaii as the Chief of Nuclear Operations at PACOM. So I was stationed at Camp Smith, which was a Marine camp in Hawaii on the island of Oahu, overlooking Pearl Harbor. And that was really a nice assignment, location-wise, except the PACOM headquarters was a World War II hospital, so it was in real bad disrepair. But the assignment was a good assignment, working directly with the commander of SIGPAC for 3 years. And problem with that assignment was there was a lot of hours of work, because in 1991, the Cold War ended, 1990, and 1992, SAC was deactivated, another deactivation, and United States Strategic Command was first born in 1992, and President Bush 41 Had a lot of presidential nuclear initiatives, which were unilateral actions, one of which was to take all the nuclear bombers off alert and take all the nuclear weapons that were deployed in the different combatant commands, like PACOM and UCOM, well not UCOM, but PACOM and others, bring them back to the United States, and deactivated certain platforms like the Blue Eagle, which was the PACOM Airborne Command Post. So a lot of change in the nuclear community with the deactivation of SAC and presidential nuclear initiatives since we had won the Cold War. And the military or Department of Defense was, and the president was taking advantage of that win and sort of unilaterally disarming a lot of things. So anyway, that was a lot of change when I got to PACOM, because that was all being implemented. And the division I went to used to be led by an 06 and had a lot of people in it. And it was, when I got there, it was being led by a major. And I had just been a major a couple of years by then. So I was a major and 2 NCOs, and that was it, to do what a whole division had to do before. So it was a lot of work. So I didn't get to see my wife very often, even though we were on a paradise island. But I wouldn't have missed that opportunity to go to PACOM. That was a good assignment. Met a lot of good people and still have in touch with a lot of them. And so after that assignment, which was a 3-year assignment, so 1993 all the way to 1996, I was at that time selected to go to the Air War College in Montgomery, Alabama at Maxwell Air Force Base. And I graduated that class in 1997, which was a really unique experience, and I enjoyed that 1 year of college. Met a lot of people that I'm still in touch with, and got to go on some interesting TDYs, because one of my electives was the joint elective, so we got to go to a lot of different bases, Marine, Navy, Army, and Air Force, and got to meet a lot of good people and some pretty unique experiences. I got to go to the Marine basic base. I'm trying to remember the name of the base.
Down in San Diego?
No, this is
Oh,
there.
Paris Islands?
Paris Island.
Yeah, I spent
So
some
I got to
time
go to
there.
Paris Island, got to stand in the footsteps and run into the building and get screamed at by a bunch of Marine drill instructors, which is kind of unique because everybody in the class is a lieutenant colonel or a colonel. So I'm sure those Marines enjoyed doing that. But it was interesting to see what Marine boots go through when they first get there. There's kind of the different bases and the different services. We went to one base, and I'm trying to remember the name of the base, a Marine Naval Air Station.
Buford?
No, not Buford. It's on the East Coast somewhere. Anyway, we had to sign a waiver for the substandard quarters they put us in, which is kind of interesting. But that's okay. It's reminded me of my Glickum days, digging foxholes. But so that was a good experience. From there, I applied for a job at the Joint Staff at the Pentagon, and was able to get hired there. And I worked in the Nuclear Operations Division at the Joint Staff, where part of my responsibility was to write the Nuclear Decision Handbook for the President. And on several occasions went over to the White House delivering the handbook and providing briefings. So, and I also got to brief several chairmen of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, because I got there, General Shali Kashvili was the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, and he was fired by, not fired, he was followed by General, God, it sucks when you get older.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah, General Shelton, Army General. So I was told I was going to brief him on his initial briefing for the SIOP, the Single Integrated Operational Plan, and the Nuclear Decision Handbook and all that. And I said, okay, what's this guy's background? So I looked up his bio and I saw that when he was a 1-star in the Army, he was a Deputy Director for Operations in the National Military Command Center. So where he was the guy on the other end of the phone for any kind of nuclear decisions coming out of the White House. So I said, okay, what am I going to do? So I decided to look up the procedures and the Nuclear Decision Handbook for when he was a 1-star and bring that with me when I briefed him on the new one. And that's what I did. I said, this is what you had when you were a 1-star. Here's what it is today. And he says, oh, this brings back nightmares. So, but that went real well. And he was the chairman the entire time I was at the Joint Staff. So I ended up with a couple of jobs at the Joint Staff, being a branch chief in the Nuc Ops Division, and then I was a division chief for the Standards and Assessments branch, responsible for ensuring all the Joint Staff procedures were followed by the combatant commands for nuclear operations. So after my 3 years there, I got promoted to colonel while I was there, full colonel. By the way, I was promoted to lieutenant colonel when I got pinned on and when I got to PACOM in 1994. I got pinned on in 1994 to lieutenant colonel. Anyway, I got selected for colonel, and I got to pin on colonel in December 1999 on the 17th, which was 30 days from the day I enlisted in the Air Force. My date of rank is 1 January of 2000 to colonel, but I asked my boss, who was a 1-star Navy admiral at the time, Admiral Willard, who later went on to be the CNO. Anyway, I said, could you pin me on the 17th? He said, sure. So he pinned me on the 17th, then I went on leave till the 1st, but I wanted to do that 30 years to the day of enlisting to pin on colonel. So finished my tour up at the Pentagon and got an assignment at United States Strategic Command. And my first assignment at STRATCOM, or I should say, my first assignment in 2000 at STRATCOM was to the Plans and Policy Directorate, and I was in the Standards and Assessment branch in the Air Room, which was responsible for writing the Single Integrated Operational Plan, which at that time was still the chairman's plan, and STRATCOM was writing it for the chairman. Anyway, I spent a year there in the J5, and Admiral Meese, the commander, has said, I want you to go to J3 and be the chief of the Nuclear Operations Command and Control Division, responsible for implementing all the chairman's emergency action procedures and writing all of STRATCOM's procedures for the ICBM crews, the bomber crews, submarine crews, the command posts, all of it, which involved writing all those procedures, and also responsible for coding all the weapons, submarine, bomber, and ICBM weapons. So use control is what that's known as. And so basically a business of zero defects. And did that job for until I retired in 2003. A lot of stress in that job because no news, or there is no good news. There's no news if everything's going well, but every day somebody's doing something that requires me to brief the 2-star and the 3-star and the 4-star, because typically people make mistakes in the field, you know, opening a code book when they shouldn't, you know, losing documents, all kinds of good stuff. I say good stuff, all kinds of stuff. Anyway, it all has to be dealt with and make sure nothing's compromised. So work closely with the Joint Staff, National Security Agency, Department of Energy, a lot of different people. So I was lucky to retire at the end of my 3-year tour, which was June of 2003. And then I was able to get a job as a GS-15 and the Div Chief for the Nuclear Command and Control Division. So at that time, in 2002, United States Space Command and United States Strategic Command were deactivated, and United States Strategic Command stood back up as a new command, which also assumed all the Space Command responsibilities. So United States Strategic Command had 2 birth dates, June 1992 and I think it was October 2002. And so a lot of changes happened. A lot of focus changed as well. Not only in the command, but also out at the units. The first commander of STRATCOM was General Butler. In 2002, the commander at that time was Admiral Ellis, Navy Admiral, and he was not a nuke guy. He was followed by General James Cartwright, a Marine, also not a nuke guy. Also had a lot of different ideas on how STRATCOM / SpaceCom would operate, and a lot of change in STRATCOM organization and component organization, etc. Caused a lot of heartache and headache for the nuke mission. And after working in the J3 as a civilian, retired '06, I did that for 5 years, and I was really burned out. So I left the J3 in 2008 and went to J5 until I retired as a civil servant in 2016. And that's my story in a nutshell.
That was very intriguing, very interesting, and you did an extremely good job of keeping just everything chronologically. If I could ask you a couple questions.
Sure.
Because so much of your career was focused in the actual operations of nuclear weapons, It seems like there's some career fields that you put it in under your belt and then you get out of it. Do you think that the nuclear career field is one that we should pigeonhole people in there like you have been, so that you get all that knowledge? Or is that one that everybody should do a tour in at least so that they have a operational understanding?
Well, I look at it this way. When I got in the Air Force, you couldn't find anybody that didn't have something to do with nukes during the Cold War. You know, as officers got promoted, somewhere in their background they had some kind of nuke experience. So
Well, I know the pocket rocket was highly coveted.
yes, the missile badge. And anyway, nuclear was also in the Army, also in the Navy, not just submarines, but on board ships, etc. So, and we had nuclear weapons in a lot of different places in the world. So during the Cold War, you couldn't go anywhere without getting some kind of nuke experience. When the Cold War ended, and we brought back all the nukes pretty much from overseas. We took nukes off of surface ships. We took bombers off alert. We deactivated some systems. So over time, you could not find a lot of people that had nuke experience when you started getting into the senior ranks, because to get those people promoted, they weren't in nukes. They weren't dealing with nuclear weapons or operations, and you ended up isolating the nuclear community as something that's just there, not something you want to go do. And so when you get up to the flag officer ranks and the chairman ranks, etc., you didn't have that experience, which kind of made getting promoted in the nuclear community more difficult because of how everything shifted. The paradigm of operations shifted, and in fact, when you look at SAC, which was responsible for all the Air Force nuclear weapons, and the commander of SAC was the director of the Joint Strategic Target Planning Staff that built the plan that was sitting there on the shelf ready to go. When SAC stood down in 1992, General Butler was the first commander of Strategic Command, U.S. Strategic Command. And at that time, it was policy that the commander of Strategic Command would rotate between Air Force and Navy, because they were the only services that still had nuclear weapons in the field. Submarines and bombers and ICBMs. So that rotated, and the deputy commander was typically a different service. So if the commander of STRATCOM was Air Force, the deputy was Vice Admiral. And if the commander was an admiral, the deputy was a lieutenant general. That changed in 2002 when STRATCOM stood down and SpaceCom stood down. STRATCOM stood back up with the space mission. The commander at that time was a 4-star admiral, no nuke experience. Admiral Ellis, he took Admiral Meese's place. Meese was a submariner, so Admiral Ellis took his place. Really great guy, good commander, paid attention. He left, and he was replaced by a 4-star Marine who had different ideas and really didn't support the nuke mission, to be honest with you. He thought we could do everything we needed to do conventionally without nukes. so didn't pay much attention to it. I say as much attention as he needed to so he wouldn't get in trouble. But he ended up, when he was getting ready to leave, going out to the missile units, telling them they all had to find something else to do because what they were doing was not important. Of course, I went to all those bases after he went, and as a civilian, trying to tell them how important it was. You know, they get their orders directly from the president. That's it. You know, we have the mechanisms to get it to them, but they only take orders from the president. So it's that important, and what they do is the bedrock. So the nuclear mission to me is the bedrock of our deterrent that allows the United States to do a lot of things militarily that people always know we have the nuclear sitting there to deter any attacks against the United States. But so I think over time, pigeonholed into the nuclear career field, it's hard because it's so small. It's hard to get everybody nuke experience. A good example is my son, who is in the Air Force. He's an air battle management guy. That's his specialty. So AWACS, and he got an assignment to STRATCOM, and he was the mission commander on the airborne command post. Nuke experience? None. But he was a lieutenant colonel and well qualified to learn it. So he's got that experience on his belt, under his belt. But there's very few opportunities for people to get experience. Anyway, it's a tough nut to crack, because you want to make people that go into the nuclear career field, operations, maintenance, whatever, have some kind of career path to be able to get promoted and make the service, the Air Force, a career. Submariners don't have that issue. That's their community. So they have a path forward to get promoted. And typically they do, and there's a very good promotion rate in submarines. Pilots, B-52s and B-2s, those aircraft are dual mission, so they have a career path, not just nuke. So it's a tough nut to crack. A lot of people have studied it and reported on it. Of course, there have been investigations with results coming out at the other end that identify that as a problem. But then you gotta have from the top. It's got to be important. The mission has to be important from the top, SecDef down. You know, and we kind of saw that in 2007, 2008, when the Secretary of the Air Force and the Secretary and the Chief of Staff of the Air Force both got fired after an incident. And Secretary of Defenses afterwards have come out and talked about how important a nuclear mission is. But a lot of times, as we know, talking about something and having actions follow it are not the same thing.
Exactly.
As we all know, lip service is cheap. So it has to be a concentrated effort. You got to make it worth people's while. Say, I want to go into missiles because it's important and I've got a career path. Otherwise, it's looked upon as, oh man, I don't want to go to missiles. There's no opportunity for me. But I don't know. Just one more thing. To be a flag officer, Goldwater-Nichols Act, I think it was 1986, said that to be a flag officer, you had to have joint assignment. And for years that was waived. And then they said, no more waiving. You have to have joint assignment. So now that's worked out pretty well because flag officers are getting their joint assignments, either as a major, lieutenant colonel, etc. And they get joint credit and they become a joint officer. But I don't see anything, I don't think you can say, all right, to be promoted to a flag officer, you gotta have nuke experience. Because there's not enough opportunity for that. Because it's a very unforgiving career. You know, you can make very few mistakes.
No, it takes me back to basic 101 leadership and training people to know the value and importance of their role. And if they don't see that, then they will not perform to that level that's required in that role. So, I mean, it's, the trash has to be taken out. Somebody's got to do it. That doesn't mean that it's not important, but somebody's got to do it. Well, you can't get any more important than nuclear weapons.
No.
Because if your enemy would sense that you're not capable, then you send the wrong message of vulnerability.
There's a simple definition of deterrence. It's called will times capability.
Yep.
So if the will is 0, 0 times anything is 0.
Yep.
So, and if the capability is 0, you can have all the will you want. So the enemy needs to know that you have the will and the capability.
So, sir, let me ask you this. Looking at somebody that is watching, they know you, or maybe it's a grandchild, maybe it's a next door neighbor. What kind of advice would you give to somebody that's looking at going into the military? You've worked in a joint service before. You probably have different ideas of good pathways, but what would you tell them overall, generically overall, serving our country today?
Well, I just whatever you're doing, just always do the right thing. You know, no matter what the career field is, always do your best, be the best you can be, and no matter what you're deciding, make sure it's the right decision or the decision to do the right thing. It's very easy to not do the right thing and cut corners. You know, one of my biggest pet peeves at STRATCOM when I was there as a colonel and a GS-15 was how people always overclassified stuff. And I'd always ask them, why did you mark this secret? You're not a classifying authority. What's your source? Well, I thought it was secret. Well, show me your source. You can't just make it up. If you could make it up, you just mark it MSU or made up stuff. And it was the same thing with flag officers and other colonels and whatnot. They just mark it classified. So it's very easy to do that. But it's very hard to see people doing that and not say anything. But everybody should be saying it because it's the right thing to do. Because if you overclassify stuff, then everything is all important, and it's not. So, and we see that in the news today.
Absolutely.
Even FOUO. Why is that FOUO? Or for official use only. Not everything is for official use only.
Right.
Anyway. That's a tough question because I have some opinions on the current state of affairs with the military.
Well, and you can share what you
reading.
feel comfortable. Yeah. Exactly, because I can understand that.
If somebody came to me, my grandson or whatever, say, hey, I'm thinking about joining the service, what do you think? Might be a different answer. But, it's great to serve. I served for 47 years, counting my civil service, and I'm still serving as a volunteer driver. for DAV. So I,
Which they're hard to find, by the way, so thank you.
well, we got a bunch of good drivers right now. But you gotta want to, to join the military is gonna be, I mean, it's a personal decision on everybody, for everybody. And everybody has their own reasons on why they want to join. Obviously, I joined the Air Force because I knew I was going to get drafted. And I prefer to make my choice rather than somebody telling me what my choice would be.
Did any of your siblings join?
Oh, well, let's see. My father was career Army.
Yeah.
My grandfather on my mother's side was also Army. Not career, but he was in World War I. I got two uncles that were in the Air Force. One served his tour and then got out, and the other one retired. My brother was in the Army for 26 years. My son is in the Air Force, active duty. He's at 22 years now. So,
It's definitely a lineage there,
yeah.
at least 4 generations.
Well, my grandson and my son's son got accepted to the Air Force Academy,
Oh, wow.
ROTC, full ride, and then he had his military physical, and they saw that he had 2 dislocations of his patella, and that disqualified him automatically. So he wasn't able to go into the service. That would have been the 3rd generation for me.
Right.
But oh well.
It's very neat to see that, because they usually, my son followed my footsteps, but I was kind of the only one in my family with 5 other brothers, and my dad was during the Vietnam era, but he had 5 boys already, and I think that's what eliminated him. I don't know, but there was never any talk of it when we were growing up at all. So I don't think he.
Well, I think when they were drafting people, if you were married, they didn't touch you until later. They were just drafting everybody that wasn't in college and didn't have a student deferment, and you weren't married, you were probably going to Vietnam.
Yep.
Line you up in a row and have every other person take a step forward while you go in the Marines, while the rest of you go in the Army. Have a nice day. My brother was drafted, but he stayed for 26 years. So I stayed for 33 and a half.
Well, we certainly appreciate your staying and all the sacrifices and everything that goes with that. I hope you enjoyed this, sharing your story. I know that we appreciate it. And with that, I'm going to end it unless there's anything else you...
Nope.